Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Mr. Ramahi, who is the CEO of Masdar and who will be delivering opening remarks and keynote for our panel.
Thank you for the opportunity to address you on a topic that is very close to Masdar and to me. How can we ensure the cities of the future are efficient, livable, and sustainable? Our cities are growing at unprecedented rate. We are building the equivalent of a new Paris every single week. New urban areas the size of Japan are created every year. By 2050, our urban population will increase more than 55% today to 68%. That is doubling the urban population in South Asia and sub-Saharan Africa. This rush to the cities is not surprising. Our cities are where the jobs and the opportunities to improve our living standards. But it is also not sustainable. Today, cities consume 80% of the world's energy, and they account for more than 70% of the global carbon emissions. But our cities also hold the key to a better future. Throughout history, they have been engines of growth, the centers of culture, and the drivers of innovation. If we are to keep global warming to under 1.5 degrees centigrade this century and meet the UN Sustainable Development Goals, we must harness this innovation to make our cities more sustainable, more livable, and definitely more efficient. Here is the good news. We already have the technology, the political will, and the funds to transform our urban areas, old and new. Here in my country, the United Arab Emirates, our leadership has long recognized that we need to think holistically to make our cities more livable. With Masdar City, our flagship sustainable urban development project, we have shown what the future of cities can be. We have created a complete sustainability ecosystem, which allows new ideas to develop and to thrive, and to find novel ways to implement existing technology. In fact, just by implementing existing technologies, cities could cut their carbon emission by almost 90% by 2050. Now, how do we do this? We need to audit our existing buildings and city infrastructure and take measures to retrofit them to be more efficient and more sustainable. We need to regulate better building standards and cleaner, greener building materials. At Masdar City, our buildings use 40% less energy than other buildings serving the same functions. We need to address cooling and heating, responsible for 50% of a building's energy consumption, and where Masdar city has made great progress in efficiency. We need to better harness digitalization and smart infrastructure to connect our city systems and introduce artificial intelligence to flag inefficiencies and issues. We need more investment in sustainable mobility to ensure mass transit of the future is efficient, convenient, and clean. At Masdar City, we have been testing autonomous electric vehicles for more than a decade now, and we are working in the UK and elsewhere in mobility infrastructure, including rolling out more charging stations for electric vehicles. We need to speed up the transition to clean energy and look at more innovative solutions to powering cities, such as distributed solar. We need to address waste management and water conservation through more efficient recycling, reusing methods. We need battery and storage solutions to ensure renewables can integrate seamlessly with existing grids or facilitate microgrids and off-grid communities. And we need to invest in the fuels and technologies of the future. At Masdar, we are exploring investment in green hydrogen, among others. We expect that this existing energy source will be cost competitive with other energy sources sooner rather than later. This year, we all hope that COVID-19 pandemic will be followed by the green recovery. In fact, there is no shortage of funds from government and from private investors to invest in bankable clean energy infrastructure. But significant challenges remain. We need to ensure that emerging markets where the pressures of urbanization are most acute get their share of these funds. We need political decision makers to commit to investing in these technologies today without waiting for the next big thing. And most importantly, we need to change how we interact with our cities. In this challenge, our great hope is our youth. By educating our young people on the need for a new way of looking at cities, we can ensure their support as agents of real change. Our survey on youth attitudes towards climate change revealed that Generation Z saw the environment as the single biggest challenge the world must address. The pandemic has shown us that when the world works together, we can overcome acute challenges. Just look at how vaccines were developed, tested, and made available in record time. The challenge posed by climate change is even more serious and will have even more devastating impact on our economies than COVID-19. The solution to that challenge lies in us working together to fix our cities. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to the interesting discussions ahead of us.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Al-Ramahi, for your very thoughtful remarks. I'm Michelle Moore, and I'm joining you all this evening from about an hour south of Washington, D.C. And I remember in 2008 being in Abu Dhabi and being so filled with hope and joy about what the future of the city could look like, and particularly about sustainability. And after 2020, in these challenging early days of 2021, I think we go into this next year, speaking from my own perspective, perhaps much wiser from the experience of COVID about what sustainability, resilience, and adaptability, look like for the future of the city in the United States and around the world. Our panel this afternoon represents a very global perspective and a very learned one at that on that topic. And I'd like to begin with you, Minister Fu. If you could please share from your perspective, what is the future of the city in terms of sustainability and resilience, and how might your leadership perspectives on that have changed over the course of the past year, thinking about a post-COVID world?
Thank you very much, Michelle. Indeed, I agree with you that wiser and understanding how we can react with the environment and also a global environment at large is really the lesson we take from COVID. And if I may add, actually, I would become calmer as well. I mean, if you have gone through 2020, you have to learn how to adapt very, very quickly. And I think that's really what the cities will look back and say, okay, how have I responded to COVID? And what are the kind of lessons I can learn to make ourselves a lot more resilient going forward? I mean, we have gone through various levels of lockdown and opening. How do I respond quickly to keep ourselves going? And I'd like to share that perhaps from three perspectives. Really, a resilience in economic terms, resilience in climatic terms, and also resilience in terms of resource that we have. Mm-hmm. If you look at the economic resilience, we're looking at digitalization really as an enabler. And also, I think most of us agree that we have never adopted so much technology in such a short time and wrote a sharper learning curve than 2020. Because of COVID-19, I think we are forced to learn very quickly and adapt quickly. So from Singapore's perspective, how do I keep the economic activities going despite lockdown, despite supply chain disruptions? How do I enhance the adaptability and decision-making capability by harnessing the databases that we have as a government? I think that's really something that we want to take from 2020. We have learned that even in the management of COVID, we need databases, we need information coming very quickly from the health system, from the custom, from the airport, and again, good looking at information, giving us the ability to decide quickly. I think that's something that we want to enhance after 2020. Automation and productivity cannot be underestimated. We have seen how we have to operate with fewer people because of lockdown, because of quarantine. I'm sure companies are now, perfected the skills of working half-time or even remotely for a long time. So how do we continue to do that without compromising the operations of the city, operations of public service? I think we have a lot to catch up and a lot to work on. In terms of resources, we have also come to realize that we need to be, sufficiently capable to grow our own food supply. So we have a 30 by 30 goal, something that has been accelerated because of COVID, because we realized that when we have a supply disruptions, not just from one or two countries, but from several countries or several regions at the same time, it tells us that we need to be a lot more careful when it comes to food security, resource security. So we are looking at building up our capability in order to withstand some of these shocks. Also, if you look at resource utilization, if you have only less than half of your staff back in the office building, an office building that is perhaps a quarter full, how can you manage this building better and be more energy efficient? Again, using technology, using IoT, using a much more flexible and machine learning way to allow us to manage resources, manage capacity better, will be, I think, an emphasis of ours. The last one really is on climate change. I think COVID-19 has really taught us an important lesson about the linkages between the environment, between the public health system and economic and social segments. We can't work unless we have a clean and hygienic environment. And I think that's something that will definitely be something that we bring upon ourselves, looking at how we can raise the level of hygiene in Singapore in all sectors, and also how can we manage what global warming could bring us in terms of warming, in terms of pandemics in the future.
Thank you so much, Minister. And Karim, data and technology is such a theme, in the perspectives that Minister Fu has shared. Can you please elaborate on what you see the role of data science and technology being in enabling a future sustainable city?
I mean, some of the keywords that we heard were react to the environment and response. So basically, the role of data is to allow preemptive action instead of costly reaction. And I think one of the best examples, if you talk about the COVID situation, of this is that the countries that manage the situation best are those who tested most. And testing is not a cure nor is a medicine, but it's actually data that narrows down your problem in a spatial and temporal way that can deal with it. And the same thing comes in sustainability in cities. You want to narrow it down on a city level. And one of the and actually this notion is not new. It's actually one of the very prominent stories in the Middle East is of a famous physician one millennia ago who was asked to build the biggest hospital in Baghdad and find the best location for it. So he hung raw pieces of meat, and where this meat remained the freshest, he decided there, I'm going to build the hospital. So it's about integrating environmental aspects in the decision making and using all the modern tools that we have today, satellites, IoT, machine learning, big data, in order to narrow down the challenges from a spatial and temporal perspective. And I see future cities as a reactive entity instead of, as a preemptive action than reactive reaction. So, yeah.
That's great. A great perspective and a really great story to share, too, to illuminate how powerful those ideas have always been in enabling healthier, more sustainable places to live. Another theme that Minister Fu identified is thinking about resource efficiency and resource resilience and sustainability, being able to produce what you need locally. Allison, can you talk a little bit about the role that you envision for land development, and how we think about land planning in future sustainable cities?
Sure. Thanks, Michelle. It's great to be here. I think the interesting thing that's going to happen to us in the next 20, 30 years is a kind of massive growth in our population. And I think that's the first thing we have to accept, is that our resources are going to be strained. I think in particular focus comes the role of cities. Urbanization, we're going to see city growth in some parts of the world as much as 800%. And I think when you think about that what that happens to urban centers, I think we have to accept that our traditional role of city and countryside starts to change. We don't have this kind of separation any longer. What we're going to see is a massive growth in cities, in building, in supplies and resources to provide the infrastructure for that. And then we're going to see the rural lands develop into a highly productive space. Right now, we're already looking at 70% of the global land use being human managed. In fact, 25% of our global land use is providing our food, our clothing, and our materials. So you can imagine that this situation just becomes more intense as urbanization grows. I think we're going to start to see high competition for that land to be performative and to be able to produce all the things that we need. And at the same time, we're talking about lessening our dependence on fossil resources. So as our resources move from underground to overground, we're going to see that land having to do a lot for us to survive. And so I think the role of nature is changing in that scenario. I think our old ideas of being separated from a natural space are changing already. I mean, with 70% of our land being human managed, I think we're starting to see that we have become part of that nature. And so in particular, like when we're talking about the COVID lockdowns, I think we have to recognize that there is that ecosystem that we're already participating in, and that we just have to get a lot smarter about how we engage with those ecosystems that we're going to be reliant more and more on.
Thank you so much for that, Allison. I think also an experience that a lot of us have probably had during the lockdown too is, to your point, just how important the relationships for human health and well-being are for access to outdoors, just to be able to get a little sunshine and a little bit of green, when we're inside so much. And so contemplating 70% of our land mass being human managed, that's a real transformation of the relationship between society, and land as well, particularly in more traditional parts of the world. Minister Fu, if you could also share, as we move towards this future, where we're going to be looking to much greater extent to technology and data science to help make us smarter and more nimble and adaptive, where we're going to be thinking about new relationships between not just city and country, but also humanity and the natural environment. What are the roles that you see for international collaboration, not just at the government-to-government level, but even international collaboration like the groups that are here or that are with us online this evening / this morning, in more informal relationships and collaborations too?
Absolutely. I think there are great opportunities. COVID has brought a lot of challenges, but at the same time, I think it aligned us in many ways. I think when it comes to cooperation on public health, I think there's been good collaboration and very quick mobilization of the best minds, the best scientists in the world in the development of vaccines and sharing of information on this virus. So I think that spells, optimism for humanity. Obviously, in the area of climate change and sustainability, it's another area where global cooperation is required, because this is one topic where, require every single one of us to be part of this movement. And I think the collaboration can come in many forms. For example, we're going to need new solutions and new technologies. And the technology is going to come from many places. Some of them will come from the university. Some of them will come from corporate labs. Some of them may reside in amongst us. So how can we harness that resources and the collaboration? I think it's something that we need to think about. Second area really is in financing. We're going to find new solutions, we're going to transit, and in the process, we need some new rules to be written. What would be considered green? What would be considered sustainable product? What would be projects that we collectively want to finance going forward? I think we need a lot of agreements on that. And also we need to bring resources from those who have resources to those who need. And in this process, again, I think the nature-based solutions, for example, will involve the participation of many local or even tribal communities. So many areas, I think, require that ground-up organic collaboration across the world.
I like the very hopeful picture that you paint, hopeful and wiser. Certainly having been reminded of this very common experience, this shared experience that we've had. When we think about leveraging technology and data in human systems, we also have to think about the ethics that we put to work to enable them. So, Karim, can you please give us a few thoughts on and what would your recommendations be on the ethics of the data systems that we use and how you would approach creating that much more nimble city of the future with data?
Yeah, I think one of the first questions we always get when we work with cities is who owns the data? Like, this is a very, very basic question. Who has the power over the data? And for us, of course, since, as Allison highlighted, cities will be a focal point of our civilization, basically. Cities do have a power and should have a power over the data. And also in terms of how it is used, how transparent it is, at what resolution are we providing this data, and also the temporal context of it. But there is also a second challenge, is that we're living in a world that technology is moving extremely fast. So oftentimes the data, as we see with the entire topic about social media, like the data is being collected faster than the policymakers can adapt their policies to manage how the data is being collected. So I do feel that there is a gap between those who move fastest with technology, for example, young startups, for example, innovative universities and also corporates, and the direct links to the policymakers, which stands for this kind of paradigm shift between the established companies And so I think this is a point that's going to be challenging in the future, is how can policies and standards catch up with the technology so not to be misused, because the moment you leave a void, people can misuse it for their own advantage, as we see already today in the debate in the US, but also in Europe, about data privacy and data usage. So I think this is what will be one of the biggest challenges, is just a temporal perspective of how fast technology is evolving and data is being generated.
So we've really got to think about the data ecosystem and the way that it interacts with policy as we think about the future sustainable city too. Allison, a part of this is also just the materiality. Like, what's it going to take to build the future that we're envisioning here? From your perspective, what do we need to do to balance just the sheer scale that we've got to operate in terms of building infrastructure with even carbon negative solutions to get us where we want to be from a climate perspective?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a really great point. I think first of all, we should see very clearly, speaking of data and what Karim was just mentioning, the growth of our cities. So the actual physical growth, because we see a lot of dematerialization happening with digital systems, but actually we are going to have to build with something to provide for this population increase. And what it's said that just by the building materials we need alone, we're going to emit 350 gigatons of CO2 into the atmosphere. And when you think about that, that number represents the fact that materials have the possibility to make or break a carbon budget, just construction materials. So when we go back to this idea of resources, where are we going to depend on? What's going to provide those materials? And I like to see it as more of an opportunity. We should be planning for this future growth in a way that we can sustain ourselves. And I think if you look at what we have are forested areas of the globe that are considered carbon sinks. Obviously, we're not going to be able to maintain that if we need the land to do other things. So I think we need to start considering the role of engineered sinks, and we need to look to our cities. So as we build, those materials that we use, the selection, the choice, the idea that those can store carbon from the atmosphere. This could be a revolutionary idea about the role of urbanization in our future. It could be the chance we have to create a sustainable city that's actually able to do something about the climate crisis that we've caused. And I think when you talk about the role of carbon negative, this is a great concept. This is this idea that we can take more CO2 out of the air than we emit in making something. So if you consider the role of cities and urbanization can play in that, if we had a process like that, we could take the growth of cities and have it actually reverse what we've managed to do with the climate crisis.
Wonderful. Well, we've presented very hopeful, thoughtful, data-driven future vision of the city here, and one that's connected, informed, and grounded in good ethics and good policy. So in the last couple of minutes that we have here, I just invite each of you to please take 30 seconds and share what your admonition to the audience would be this evening. What should people go forth and do or focus on? So Karim, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I think I'll go back to sort of what drives us is basically there is no separation wall between the environment we live in and our society. So whenever you consume, whenever you manage resources, whenever you drive, whenever you move, there are today ways and tools to take the environment into account, and be it on the individual level up until the policy and corporate level. And the technology is there. We've never had the amount of satellites measuring environment and air quality, sensors in cars, in advertising boards. So this huge amount of data, be courageous to work with them and let them guide your decisions. Let's try to avoid, this, not fact-based decision making, but just hunch-based. Yes. We have to go back to the data-based decision making and integrate science into our decisions.
I like that. Courageous integration of data in decision making. Minister Su.
Yes. I would like to think that, as policymakers, we can play a role in liberalizing the environment in the business, environment in where we live. And I think I'd like to pick up Allison's point about having good planning so that we can build better, so that we can have cities that will not only just take up carbon footprints, but at the same time a great way to achieve the economic and social development with a reduced footprint, so that on the whole, we can do more with less resources. And I think in Singapore, we aspire to do that with maximum outcome, minimum resources.
Beautiful vision. Allison, last 30 seconds, close us out.
Yeah, I think those are really great points. I think hope is a big word and one that we should all embrace. I think another point in this is to try to make economic winners out of this crisis. I think that's the only way that we can gather together and say this is an opportunity we have to improve our condition together.
And to do it in a way that's equitable so that we're lifting many more up through this sustainable future and the process that we envision. So thank you all so much for the wonderful discussion. It's been a blessing to be with you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Yeah.
Okay.